I want to introduce you to a wonderful friend of mine and a great speaker. His name is Dr. Jeff Myers, and he is the president of Summit Ministries. Now, Dr. Jeff is an educator and an entrepreneur, and he is one of America's most respected authorities on youth leadership development. So evangelist Josh McDowell, who's another friend of our Summit family, called Dr. Jeff a man who is 100% sold out to preparing the next generation to reflect the character of Christ in the culture. So Dr. Jeff holds a Doctor of Philosophy degree from the University of Denver and continues to engage college students. He's always got his pulse on what's going on with young adults and adult learners because he serves as a trustee at Colorado Christian University. And he also works for several Fortune 100 companies in training them in leadership as well. Jeff and his wife Stephanie live right here in Colorado Springs. Again, not Hawaii, but you know, I've had some stuff here. I had the ukulele. I had a sarong ready to pack for the beach in Hawaii. Not going to work out. Maybe I could use it as a scarf. But you guys enjoy Dr. Jeff in Session 1, Truth Changes Everything, an Introduction to Worldview.
Thank you, Megan. Do I get to keep these?
Sure.
Okay, we're going to give a special book giveaway for the first person who can text our team and tell us the best way to crack a coconut. And I will know. This is the only thing I remember from my time in Hawaii. But I at least remember that. So the first person to text or to contact us and say, here's how you do it. And if they're correct, then we'll have a special giveaway for them as well. All right, I hope you are doing well. I'm really glad to be with you here today. We're coming from Colorado. We have snow on the ground here, snow up on Pikes Peak. It's white, snow covered. It's cold here. But we get the opportunity today to be together with people all over the United States of America and around the world to talk about the impact of a biblical worldview. Worldview changes everything. And what I'd like to do in the time I have with you in this very first session is to talk about what this idea of a worldview really is, and especially how that affects those of us who are educators. And we have a lot of teachers who are involved in this day, a lot of people who are coaches, a lot of people who are homeschool moms and dads, a lot of people who work with young people at their church or who mentor a young adult. And so how does this all fit together? Why should we disciple our minds, and what does all of this mean? I'd like to begin with a poll. That poll is going to pop up on your screen there, and I'd love to get your response right away. And in just a few minutes, I'll talk about the results. But my poll question is this: what best describes your feelings at the dawn of 2021? What is today's date? It's the 15th or the 15th. January 15th, 2021. We should all be in flying cars by now. The world should be completely sterile and free from disease. All of that was promised. But anyway, I don't want to bias your view. But are you worried, bored, happy, isolated, angry? Which one of those best describes your feelings? I want to show you a picture that you might be familiar with from 2020, except that it is not from 2020. This is what my hometown of Detroit, Michigan looked like when I was a small child. There was a riot there that injured 2,000 some people. Several dozen people were killed. More than 1,000 people had to go to the hospital. 2,000 buildings were destroyed. The city of Detroit never recovered. And I'll tell you, it was a tough place to grow up as a kid. I was offered hard drugs for the first time at 7 years of age. I remember cowering under my bed at the sound of a gunshot in the street. I remember the body of a heroin overdose victim being wheeled out of the house across the street, and I was asking my mom, why does that person have a sheet over them? My parents knew they could not sustain life in this kind of an environment. So when I was almost 10 years of age, we moved from Detroit, Michigan to Great Bend, Kansas. This is a picture of Great Bend, Kansas during rush hour. Okay, brutal. I mean, sometimes you might even have one car in front of you at the stoplight. But Great Bend was a wonderful place to grow up. It was small. I mean, my previous city was 1.7 million people. This city was 17,000. Our previous church was 2,000 people. This church was so small that our family of 4 increased attendance by 20% just by walking in the door. And it was a wonderful place to grow up. But the people in my small country church dedicated as they were to the Lord, did not have answers to a lot of the questions I was asking about my faith and about the world. And so I had pretty much decided that when I graduated from high school, I was also going to graduate from church. My parents were very concerned about this, and so they arranged for me to come to Manitou Springs, Colorado, this little hippie town tucked in right at the foot of Pikes Peak, to a program called Summit Ministries. This is the hotel where we're having this broadcast from today. And this is the hotel where over 58 years we have welcomed some 40,000 young people through these doors. And in these programs, students learn a biblical worldview. They also learn about the counterfeit worldviews that are grappling for their attention. They learn how you would live as a Christian on your campus and in the larger society. I didn't know any of this when I arrived. I walked in the front doors of the hotel. I saw Dr. David Noble, the founder of the program there, and I said to him, I was 17, I hope you have a lot of answers because I have a lot of questions. I don't know if you've ever been self-centered like that. It really seems like an embarrassing thing to have been so arrogant at 17. But David Noble's response to that shaped my life. He said to me, at Summit, we aren't afraid of questions. That's exactly what I needed to hear. And I wonder if that's also what the young people we're working with today need to hear. That we want you to ask your questions because we believe that a Jesus-centered worldview is at the basis of all of reality. Well, how are you feeling about this year? I'd love to see those polls. Love to see what your thoughts are. I'm really curious. I haven't done this poll with adults before. So, what are some of your responses to that question? Let's have a look. 37% worried, 3% bored. That's good. Very low levels of boredom. Nathaniel, you're never bored. No. Okay, the guy who's doing the floor managing here is Nathaniel. I can't tell him what company you work for, but it's a major broadcast company, and he's over here helping us today. But you're never bored in your job, never, okay? Happy, 41% happy. That's so good. I want to see how many of those responses are from Hawaii, okay? Because if somebody says, I am unhappy and I'm in Hawaii, that's just wrong. 42%, okay, see, that's even going up. People are getting happier the longer we go. Isolated, 11%, 8% angry. Interesting to see the responses. You know, most of the young adults that we have in our Summit programs, isolated, super high. They feel that somehow their lives are being taken away from them. And I want to address it from their perspective because they're the ones we're trying to reach. So where are we going in this first bit of time, in the next 22 minutes? Well, first, I just want to acknowledge the fact that we feel disoriented because of what is happening in our culture. Second, I want us to understand that we are not helpless. We can understand the times in which we live. And then third, I want us to recognize that when we understand the times, we can know what to do. I just want you to breathe a sigh of relief right now, that God is in charge. And that He's given us His Word as a special revelation from Him through the person of Jesus Christ to prepare us for just these kinds of times. If I were to take all of 2020 and put it into one picture, this is the picture I would use. Because this is what was happening in so many cities. And people want to know, how can I respond to this? Well, some people try to respond to difficult times by just being happy and pretending that those difficult times don't exist. You may have heard of the group BTS. If you have kids, guarantee you've heard of them because it's a Korean boy band whose this song here, Dynamite, has been in the top 40 songs in the Billboard charts for almost half of a year. And they sing, because I'm up in the stars tonight, so watch me bring the fire and set the night alight. Shoes on, get up in the morn, cup of milk. That's how you know they're a Korean boy band. Cup of milk, let's rock and roll. But the truth is, we don't really feel that way. The psychologist William James, who was by no means a Christian, put words to this in a way I think is really powerful. He said, most of us feel as if a sort of cloud weighed upon us, keeping us below our highest notch of clearness and discernment, sureness in reasoning or firmness in deciding. Compared with what we ought to be, we are only half awake. A lot of the young adults we work with believe that leaving their faith is what will help them wake up to what is really real. In fact, 70% of those who are significantly involved in youth group in high school are no longer even attending church in their 20s. What's the biblical answer to this? Well, there are a lot of aspects to it. And I'm going to be joined by my colleague Greg Kokel to talk about many of those. But I'd like to draw your attention to what might seem to be a random passage of Scripture, 1 Chronicles 12:32. It's one of those passages you might have skipped over in your personal devotions because it just lists the number of people who in each of the tribes of Israel coming to David's side as he prepares to become king of Israel. But we're given this special little note of the tribe of Issachar, men who had understanding of the times, to know what Israel ought to do, 200 chiefs and all their kinsmen under their command. This verse stands out from the rest of the passage because all of the other tribes are listed by their troop strength. The tribe of Issachar is listed by the strength of its leaders. My friend Dr. Bill Brown puts it this way: one person sincerely committed to a cause is more valuable to that cause than 1,000 who are merely interested. If we are the ones who understand the times and know what our nation ought to do, then we can have a genuine influence in the times in which we live. A lot of people try to do this by sharing their ideas. Of course, sharing of ideas doesn't always turn out quite right. If you were in our town, in Manitou Springs, Colorado, most of the cars you would see look like this. People are sharing their ideas by putting them on bumper stickers. But the interesting thing to me is that when you look at the sum total of all these bumper stickers, you can figure out that there is a pattern to this person's thinking about the world. Hang on to that idea for just a moment. We are surrounded by ideas. We're surrounded by ideas everywhere we go. In fact, I've got another poll question for you. I'd love to see the results of this. Where would you say people pick up most of their ideas? Would you say it's through social media? Would you say it's through movies/music? Would you say it's through church? Would you say family? Would you say friends? Where would you say people pick up most of their ideas? And those of you who have access to that poll, I'd love to get your thoughts about this. And I'll compare them to what the young adults who attend Summit Ministries programs say. But ideas surround us all of the time. We're facing them every place we go. And every idea is really a seed. Contained in that seed is an understanding of where we came from, where we are going, how we ought to live our lives, and so forth. So, do we have any poll results yet? Perfect. Okay, here we go. Where would you say people pick up most of their ideas? Look at this. Social media, 67%. 67%. I don't know about you, but that's kind of chilling that we pick up most of our ideas through social media. 10% through movies and music. 1% from church. 1% of people pick up their ideas from church. 13% from family, 15% from friends. I don't know about you. That's startling to me. That those, even people who are committed Christians, sometimes think, yeah, I go to church, it's just something that I do, that's part of my life. But it isn't where I understand the times in which I live and figure out what we ought to do. Well, I've got a few minutes here to set up how we're going to approach things for the rest of the day. And I would say, and I hope that Greg would agree with me, he'll be up here in a few minutes and he can correct this, but I would say if you remember nothing else from today, I just want you to remember that ideas flow in patterns. Ideas flow in patterns. The ideas are not random. They come from worldviews that influence us every single day. And the things we listen to on the radio, or the songs we hear, or the conversations we have. And a pattern of ideas is called a worldview. In the book that Dr. David Noble and I wrote together called Understanding the Times, I define a worldview as a pattern of ideas, of beliefs, of convictions and habits that help us make sense of God, the world, and our relationship to God and the world. That's a lengthy definition, but there are a couple of key concepts. First of all, that there are patterns that we can understand that our patterns of ideas form into beliefs. Strong beliefs are called convictions, and then we live based on those convictions, so our habits get formed as well. And you say, but how does that really matter? If somebody has a Christian worldview or a Marxist worldview, how does that really matter? You know, it isn't so much in a person's daily life where you'll see the difference. It's in the flow of their lives through time. Let me give you an illustration, even of how this can happen at the national level. After World War II, the Korean Peninsula had to make a decision. What worldview will we live going forth? Of course, the nation of Korea divided into two parts. North Korea chose to follow Marxist atheism. South Korea chose to follow Christianity. This is not to say that everybody in North Korea was a Marxist atheist or everybody in South Korea was a biblical Christian. But you know as well as I do that the Christian influence in South Korea was profound and remains strong to this day. I've traveled to Korea many times, and I'm telling you, everybody's up, all among the believers, 5:30 in the morning, praying for hours before they go to work. And you would say, well, what difference does this really make? Probably in day one, it didn't make a lot of difference. Week one, maybe not much of a difference. Year one, you start to see the change. By now, however, the change is evident. So evident that when you look at a satellite photo of the Korean Peninsula at night, you see well-lit, prosperous South Korea and North Korea almost literally in the dark ages. Ideas have consequences for how we live our lives. So how does this idea of worldview fit into values and behavior? Because that's usually what our discussion is, right? Here's how I would look at it. I would say a worldview is at the foundation. Built on that worldview are our values, what we believe, therefore what we hold to be important. And then on top of the values would be behavior. You can almost imagine a water line right here, and this is an iceberg. Behavior is the part that you see above the surface, but your values and your worldview are below the surface. A lot of times among Christian educators, we talk about the process of discipleship. The process of discipleship is helping people form their values and behavior based on what they know to be true. But there's another aspect to this, and it's the term discernment. Discernment is being able to look at the world around you and how it behaves and infer from that the values that are embraced and the worldview that they hold to be true. The Apostle Paul says, do not be taken captive by hollow and deceptive philosophies. That's the process of discernment. Charles Grosvenor Osgood defined discernment as the supreme end of education. He said, the supreme end of education is expert discernment in all things, and then he defines it this way: the power to tell the good from the bad, the genuine from the counterfeit, and to prefer the good and the genuine to the bad and the counterfeit. I visited another country. I was walking down the street, and a man walked up to me and said, "Hey, do you want to buy a real fake Rolex?" And I thought, okay, I know sarcasm doesn't translate into other languages, but I so desperately wanted to say, are you sure it's a real fake? Because everybody else in these stores here with all the security guards, they're selling fake fakes. Because in English that makes sense, right? A double negative is a positive. I just skipped it all, said no thank you. But as I was walking down the street, I realized what he meant. That his fake Rolex looked more real than the other fake Rolexes and was more likely to trick people. Now, there are lots of different worldviews out there in the world. I even remember a poll from Great Britain where hundreds of thousands of people, they were just trying to trick the government. They're always playing jokes, on their government. And they said, when they were asked, what is your religious preference? Hundreds of thousands of people said, Jedi. Several thousand people said, heavy metal music. That's my religion. So there could be hundreds of different responses to that question. But over time, it has begun to emerge that there are 6 worldviews that have a dominant influence, especially on life in the West. The Christian worldview is obviously one of them. But then there are 5 worldviews that I consider to be counterfeit worldviews because they contain enough of a grain of truth that they trick people into believing a bigger lie. Islam would be an example. Secularism. Secularism says that religion is the problem that we face in the world, and that if we just got rid of all of the religious people, then we could have a much better life. Marxism Marxist worldview is rebounding in an incredible way in our time. 70% of millennials said that they would vote for a socialist for president of the United States. But the socialist worldview comes from the Marxist worldview. That is its origin, whether we like that or not. New spirituality, or some people call it the New Age movement. And then postmodernism, which says that the problem in the world is that we claim to know the truth. Right? People who say they know the truth end up hurting other people. That's what the postmodern worldview says. So we just stop believing in any such thing as truth. These worldviews, David Noble and I explore in our book. And we look at them in particular in relation to 10 different areas of life. I'll get into that a little bit more in the session that we have this afternoon called A Worldview of Everything, where I'm going to talk specifically to educators about how to teach a biblical worldview, even in areas like mathematics and athletics. For now, though, I just want to point out that very few Christians really do have a biblical Christian worldview. We did a study with the Barna Research Group, very well-respected polling organization. We found that among church-going Christians, 100% of church-going Christians believed in at least one of the biblical Christian statements. That's good, okay? 100% of Christians believe at least something that is Christian. But then when we took all of the Christian statements together, 13 of them, which were basic things like there is a God, Jesus Christ is the Son of God, Jesus Christ is our way to salvation, sin is real, Satan is real, so forth. Only 19% of church-going Christians believe in a Christian worldview. Now try to imagine being in church pre-COVID. You got 10 people in the pew. Only 2 of them have any understanding of what is going on. The other 8, what are they thinking? One of those other worldviews. What they're probably thinking is, I'm here because it's so interesting to listen to the pastor's story and see how I might want to have that as part of my story if I so choose. That the core belief is in the self. I want to point out that in various times in history, especially after great disasters, for example, after the Black Death, after the bubonic plague in the 1300s, there was a renaissance of ideas around the fact that Jesus Christ is the truth, right? The truth exists, and it's not just a concept or a set of propositions. It's not just a mathematical formula. Truth is a person, and it is the person of Jesus. People who believe that have changed the world. Since I know we have a lot of educators in our group today, let me just give you somebody who was one of the founders of education. This guy's name was Colin Barnes. He lived in the 500s, and he was an Irish monk. So he lived on this island, and somehow he got a hold of a copy of the Gospels, which had to have been miraculous. And he read in there, "Go into all of the world and teach people to obey me," Jesus said. Okay, he said, oh, well, how do I go into all the world? Because it's clearly not on this island. So he built a boat out of animal skins and said to his brother monks, push me out into the water. No oar, no sails, just push me out. I'm going to go into all the world. Wherever I land is where I will minister. He landed in the Isle of Britain. He came to a shore and he said, all right, everybody, the truth has been revealed to us. It's in Jesus Christ. We're going to start a church here. I need all of you to convert to Christianity. And we're going to start by building this church where we can train people to share the gospel, called a monastery. Well, the monastery started to collect books. It became a library. Ultimately, that monastery turned into a university. It's a really cool story. Because Colin Barnes then he got in the boat again. He only did it twice. The second time, fortunately, he landed up in France. And he did the same thing there, started a monastery there. Then he went overland through Switzerland and down into Italy. He's one of the most revered saints in Italy, even to this day. But each time he formed a monastery, it turned into a library and ultimately into a university. Our very idea of higher education in many ways can be traced back to this guy. One of those early universities that started off as a monastery, not one founded by Colin Barnes, but another story behind it, was Oxford University, which you probably have heard of. An early professor at Oxford University was this guy. His name is Robert Grosseteste, which is a hilarious name because in German that basically means fathead. Okay, so there literally was a Professor Fathead, just in case you're wondering. And he taught about science. Well, what today we would call science. At the time he said, God really exists. He's made the world in an orderly fashion so we can observe it and our observations can make sense. Then we can plan out our actions and what we should do. You may have never heard of this guy, but you have definitely heard of one of his star pupils, a guy named Roger Bacon. Roger Bacon is the guy we now look back to as the founder of modern science. In fact, this is such a profound thing that the historian from Baylor University named Rodney Stark said that of the 52 people who founded modern science, all but one of them was a Christian. There was one atheist. Well, maybe one New Ager in there. But all the rest were believing Christians. And we're going to see, when I talk about science this afternoon, how it is only based on assumptions that are consistent with biblical revelation can we even have science. I just want us to take those two really odd examples from a monk floating around in an animal skin boat and Professor Fathead and realize that God will accomplish what he intends to do. And he does it through his people, even the quirky ones, but especially through the risk takers. So, we're in a strange place right now. We're in a place where our culture seems to be unraveling in many ways. We're in a place right now where 40% of young adults, 40%, have mental health issues related to anxiety and depression. That 25% of 20-somethings say that they have considered suicide within the last 30 days. This morning in the podcast that I do, I had the opportunity to interview the head of clinical counseling for Colorado Christian University. And he shared with me, he said, the only way out of this is a spiritual revival in our hearts and ultimately in our nation. So we have a lot of work cut out for us. You may be thinking of your own children right now. You may be thinking of those you wish wouldn't have walked away, and you pray for them every day. You may be thinking about the students you're working with, those who are kind of on the brink, and you're not sure exactly what to do. You may be thinking of those who are your maybe even brothers and sisters who've had faith struggles. You may be thinking of the people you try to connect with every day, and you're finding that the relationships are growing colder because there's so much division between people now. How could we ever make a difference in a world like this? Well, today we get to begin unraveling some really hopeful things that we can do, including how to communicate truth at a powerful level with those we have the opportunity to influence, and how to do it in a relational way so that we win hearts as well as minds. But I want to leave you with a quotation that has become one of my favorites. It's from a book series of books that I read to my children when they were growing up, called the Lord of the Rings series. At one point in the narrative, Frodo says, I wish none of this had happened. Oh, I should have warned you, I'm going to use the voices, okay? Because I read this 3 times aloud to my children, I earned the right to use the voices. Frodo says, I wish none of this had happened. And Gandalf says to him, so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us.